James, a successful businessman in his early 40s, has built a comfortable life for himself and his daughter, Sophie. After the tragic death of his first wife, he was left heartbroken, raising Sophie on his own for several years. Sophie, now 15, is a quiet, introspective girl, often lost in books or sketching by the large bay window in their stately suburban home just outside of New York City. Despite her reserved nature, Sophie has a warm heart, and her father is her whole world. Enter Emily, a charming and elegant woman in her mid-30s, whom James met at a charity gala a little over a year ago. Emily is tall, with meticulously styled blonde hair, and always dressed in designer clothes. To the outside world, she appears to be the perfect stepmother and wife. Graceful, supportive, and kind, she quickly wins over James with her confidence, wit, and supposed devotion to building a new life together as a family. At first, Sophie tries to warm up to Emily. She wants to see her father happy after so many years of grief. There are initial moments where everything seems perfect. Family dinners are filled with laughter, and they take weekend trips to the countryside, with James often praising Emily for being a positive influence in both their lives. But as time passes, Sophie starts feeling an uneasy tension in the air when her father isn't around. Emily's affectionate smiles and encouraging words directed at James seem less sincere when the two are alone. Sophie doesn't want to jump to conclusions, but a strange feeling grows in her chest. She wonders if she's imagining it, or if there's something darker behind Emily's polished exterior. Emily, however, hides her true feelings well, especially when James is present. Behind closed doors, there are subtle comments, lingering glances, and a feeling of being watched, which makes Sophie uncomfortable in her own home. The once warm and welcoming household now feels colder, but Sophie isn't yet sure if it's just her nerves or something more insidious. As the weeks go by, Sophie begins to notice subtle changes in Emily's behavior, particularly when her father isn't around. When James is present, Emily is all smiles, complimenting Sophie on her schoolwork or asking about her day with an air of interest. But when it's just the two of them, Emily's demeanor shifts. Her eyes, once seemingly warm, now carry a condescending edge. Sophie often catches Emily staring at her in the mirror during breakfast, her expression unreadable, but Sophie senses something uncomfortable in the air. One afternoon, Sophie is quietly reading on the couch when Emily walks in. "Don't you have anything better to do?" Emily asks in a tone that's meant to sound casual, but carries an undercurrent of disdain. Sophie looks up, slightly taken aback. "I just finished my homework," she responds softly, unsure if she had done something wrong. Emily gives her a once-over, her lips curling into a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. "It wouldn't kill you to be a little more active. Maybe take up a hobby that doesn't involve sitting all day." The comment stings, but Sophie doesn't reply. Instead, she pulls her book closer, feeling a growing sense of isolation. These moments, small and fleeting, start to happen more often. Emily makes casual remarks about Sophie's hair, calling it wild and suggesting she should straighten it more often. "You'd look more put together," Emily says once, brushing a hand through her own perfectly styled hair. Sophie, unsure how to respond, simply nods, feeling a lump form in her throat. At night, Sophie lies in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Emily's words in her head. She wonders if she's being too sensitive or imagining things. After all, Emily is supposed to be her new stepmother. Maybe she's just trying to help, Sophie tells herself. But deep down, Sophie knows there's something more. Emily's tone, the way she looks at her, feels more like judgment than care. Sophie can't shake the feeling that Emily sees her as an outsider in her own home. These small comments and cold stares begin to build a wall between Sophie and Emily, but Sophie hesitates to tell her father. She doesn't want to worry him, and more than that, she's not sure if he would believe her. James seems so happy with Emily, and Sophie doesn't want to be the one to ruin that. But with each passing day, the tension in the house grows thicker, and Sophie feels more alone than ever. As days turn into weeks, Emily's casual remarks evolve into more pointed jabs. When they're alone, her words cut deeper, revealing a side of her that Sophie had only sensed in fleeting moments. Emily begins to seek out opportunities to undermine Sophie, taking advantage of the moments when James is at work or out of the house. What was once subtle disdain now turns into overt hostility. One evening, after James leaves for a business dinner, Emily corners Sophie in the kitchen. "You know, you're lucky your father took pity on you," Emily says, her voice low but laced with venom. Sophie, who had been washing dishes, pauses, her heart racing. "Pity?" she asks, turning to face Emily, confusion and hurt evident in her eyes. Emily steps closer, leaning against the counter with a smirk. "Yes, pity. Do you think someone like you could ever manage on your own? You're a sad little thing. Look at you. Awkward, plain, always lost in your books. If it weren't for your father, you'd be nothing." Sophie feels her throat tighten. She wants to say something, anything to defend herself, but the words catch in her chest. Emily continues, her words growing harsher. "Your father deserves better than to be burdened with you. You think just because you're his daughter, you're special? You're not. You're just another responsibility, one he was unfortunate enough to be stuck with." Sophie's hands tremble, her knuckles white as she grips the dish towel. "That's not true," she manages to whisper, but even to her own ears, her voice sounds weak. Emily lets out a small laugh, a cold, cruel sound that fills the otherwise silent kitchen. "It's true, sweetheart," Emily says, her eyes glinting with malice. "And the sooner you realize it, the better off you'll be. No one will ever love you like your father does, and when he's gone, you'll be alone. No one's going to want you, Sophie." Tears sting Sophie's eyes, but she blinks them back, refusing to let Emily see her cry. "Why are you saying this?" she asks, her voice barely audible. "Because it's the truth," Emily replies smoothly, her expression hardening. "And someone needs to teach you your place in this family. You may have been here first, but you're no longer the priority. I am." From that moment on, Emily's cruelty becomes more pronounced. She begins to humiliate Sophie at every turn, making snide comments about her appearance, her intelligence, and her place in the family. When they're alone, Emily's barbs are sharp and relentless. She calls Sophie a burden, an inconvenience, and mocks her for being too shy to stand up for herself. Sophie starts to avoid Emily as much as possible, retreating to her room whenever her father isn't home. She can feel her confidence eroding with each passing day, and the house, once her sanctuary, now feels like a prison. Emily's words echo in her mind, haunting her even in the quiet moments. Sophie doesn't know how much more she can take, but she's too afraid to tell her father. Deep down, she fears that Emily might be right. What if James never believes her? What if he chooses Emily over her? The thought terrifies her, leaving her trapped in a painful silence. As the abuse continues, Sophie grows increasingly isolated. Despite the growing tension in the household, James remains blissfully unaware. Blinded by his love for Emily, he dismisses any signs of discomfort between his daughter and his new wife. To him, Emily is the perfect partner, supportive, sophisticated, and caring. Whenever Sophie seems withdrawn or upset, James chalks it up to typical teenage angst, never suspecting that his beloved wife might be the cause. In Emily's presence, James is often filled with admiration. He frequently praises her in front of Sophie, which only deepens the chasm between father and daughter. "Emily's really brought a sense of stability to the house," James would say at dinner, unaware of the slight downturn in Sophie's expression. "She's been so good for both of us, hasn't she, Soph?" Sophie forces a smile, barely managing a nod as Emily glances at her with a smug look that only Sophie can see. James is a man of action and success, used to solving problems in business with logic and efficiency. But at home, his emotional intelligence falters, clouded by his overwhelming gratitude towards Emily for bringing warmth and companionship back into his life. He sees her as the missing piece, the person who helped him rebuild after years of loneliness following his wife's death. He believes wholeheartedly that Emily is helping him raise Sophie, teaching her values and discipline, without ever imagining that behind closed doors, Emily's guidance is nothing but cruelty. One evening, as Sophie sits quietly during dinner, picking at her food, James notices her silence. "You've been so quiet lately, sweetheart," he says with concern in his voice. "Is everything okay at school?" Sophie glances up, her heart racing, knowing this could be a moment to say something, to tell him what's really been happening. But before she can muster the courage to speak, Emily interjects smoothly. "Oh, she's just adjusting," Emily says with a soft smile that hides her malice. Teenagers go through phases, don't they, James? I'm sure she's just figuring things out. It's not easy juggling school, friends, and home life. Isn't that right, Sophie? Emily's eyes flicker with warning as she directs the question at her stepdaughter. Sophie swallows hard, feeling the weight of Emily's words pressing down on her. "Yeah," she murmurs, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine. Just a lot going on." James, reassured by Emily's explanation, nods. "I know it's tough, kiddo," he says kindly, reaching across the table to give her hand a squeeze. "But you've got us here to help. If you ever need anything, just talk to me, okay?" His words are well-meaning, but Sophie can't help but feel trapped. How can she tell her father what's really going on when he's so convinced that Emily is a positive influence? Later that night, as James and Emily sit on the couch watching TV, Sophie overhears their conversation from her room. "I'm really trying with Sophie," Emily says with a sigh, playing the role of the concerned stepmother. "But she's so distant, and I just don't know how to reach her. I hope you don't think I'm failing her." Her voice drips with false humility, designed to make James trust her even more. "Of course not," James replies, his voice full of warmth. "You've been amazing, Emily. I don't know what I'd do without you. Sophie will come around. Just give her time." The words cut through Sophie like a knife. She realizes just how deeply her father trusts Emily, how blind he is to the reality of what's happening. In his eyes, Emily can do no wrong, and that realization fills Sophie with a growing sense of helplessness. The more James trusts Emily, the more Sophie feels like she's losing her father, and the more afraid she becomes of ever telling him the truth. With James continuing to trust Emily blindly, her behavior towards Sophie worsens. What began as passive-aggressive comments and subtle jabs has now escalated into outright hostility. Emily no longer bothers hiding her disdain when they're alone, and her cruelty becomes more frequent and severe. Sophie, once a confident and happy girl, now feels like a prisoner in her own home, her spirit eroding with each passing day. It's a Saturday afternoon, and Sophie is in the living room, trying to focus on her homework. The house is quiet. James is out running errands, leaving Sophie and Emily alone together. Emily enters the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, and pauses when she sees Sophie. "Still working on that homework, I see," she says with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I guess some people just don't have the natural smarts for school." Sophie doesn't respond, trying to keep her head down and avoid any confrontation. But Emily isn't satisfied with silence. She walks closer, standing over Sophie with an air of superiority. "You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you?" Emily's voice is low and threatening. "Your father might think you're special, but I see right through you. You're nothing. Just a sad, spoiled little girl who wouldn't survive a day on her own." The words sting, but Sophie has learned to bite her tongue, knowing that standing up to Emily only makes things worse. She keeps her eyes glued to her notebook, praying for Emily to leave. But Emily doesn't stop. She leans down, her face inches from Sophie's. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," she snaps, her voice dripping with venom. Sophie slowly raises her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know why you hate me," she says quietly, her voice trembling. "I've never done anything to you." Emily lets out a bitter laugh. "Hate you? I don't hate you, Sophie. I pity you. You're a weak, pathetic excuse for a daughter, and your father is too blind to see it. But don't worry, I'll make sure he knows the truth about you soon enough." Sophie's eyes widen with fear. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you'll see," Emily says with a wicked smile. "It's only a matter of time before your father gets tired of dealing with your nonsense. I'll make sure of it." The fear that grips Sophie is paralyzing. Emily's threats are becoming more real, and Sophie knows that Emily is fully capable of manipulating her father into believing whatever lies she might concoct. The feeling of helplessness grows inside her, and Sophie becomes even more withdrawn, spending hours in her room to avoid Emily as much as possible. The abuse doesn't stop with just words. Emily begins to exclude Sophie from family activities, planning outings with James, and purposefully leaving Sophie behind. When James asks why Sophie isn't coming, Emily responds with a casual, "Oh, she didn't seem interested." You know how teenagers are. And James, wanting to avoid conflict, never questions it further. In addition to being left out of family events, Emily begins to sabotage Sophie in small, insidious ways. Sophie's school papers go missing, her clothes get damaged, and even her personal belongings are tampered with. It's as if Emily is slowly trying to erase Sophie's presence from the household. The constant gaslighting takes its toll, and Sophie's grades begin to slip. Her teachers notice her withdrawn demeanor and try to reach out, but Sophie, too scared to reveal the truth, tells them she's just going through a tough time at home. Sophie's once lively and joyful spirit is now replaced by anxiety and dread. She walks on eggshells around Emily, terrified of what she might do next. And though she longs to tell her father, the fear of not being believed and the possibility of losing him to Emily's manipulations keeps her silent. Every day, Sophie prays for an end to the torment. But with each passing week, Emily's grip on the household tightens, and Sophie feels herself sinking deeper into despair. Eventually, Sophie reaches a breaking point. The constant abuse, exclusion, and humiliation weigh too heavily on her young shoulders, and she feels like she can't bear it any longer. With nowhere else to turn and unable to confide in her father, Sophie makes a decision. She will confront Emily directly. It's a bold move, one that terrifies her, but she knows she can't continue living this way. One evening, when James is working late and the house is quiet, Sophie musters all her courage. She finds Emily in the kitchen, sipping a glass of wine while scrolling through her phone. Her face, as always, is serene, but Sophie knows better. Beneath that calm exterior lies the woman who has made her life a living nightmare. Taking a deep breath, Sophie steps forward. "We need to talk," she says, her voice shaking slightly but determined. Emily glances up from her phone, one eyebrow raised in amusement. "Oh, and what would we have to talk about?" Emily asks, her tone casual, as if she's humoring Sophie for entertainment. Sophie steels herself. "I know what you've been doing to me," she says, her voice growing stronger. "The things you say, the way you treat me when Dad's not around. You act like you care, but you don't. You hate me." Emily's expression changes, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Oh, sweet little Sophie," she says mockingly, setting her glass down and standing up to face her stepdaughter. "You're more naive than I thought. What exactly do you think you're going to accomplish with this conversation?" Sophie takes a step back, her heart racing, but she refuses to back down. "I'm not going to let you treat me this way anymore. I'll tell my dad the truth." For a moment, Emily's smile falters, but she quickly recovers, stepping closer to Sophie. "You really think your father will believe you?" she asks, her voice low and dangerous. "He loves me, Sophie. I've given him everything he needed: stability, love, companionship. You, on the other hand, are just a reminder of his past. A past he's trying to move on from." Sophie's eyes widen at the cruel words, but Emily isn't done. "You tell him whatever you want," Emily continues, her voice now dripping with venom. "But here's the thing, you're just a kid. You've always been quiet, always kept to yourself. Do you really think he'll take your side over mine? I've been the one keeping this family together. I'm the one he trusts. And you, Sophie, are just an inconvenience." Tears prick at Sophie's eyes, but she fights them back. She won't let Emily see her cry. "Not this time." "I don't care if you think he won't believe me," Sophie says, her voice shaking but resolute. "I'm telling him." Emily steps closer, towering over Sophie, her face inches away. "Go ahead," she says coldly. "But when he doesn't believe you, when he chooses me over you, you'll have no one. No father, no family. And where will you go then?" The words hit Sophie like a punch to the gut. She can feel her resolve crumbling under Emily's manipulation, the weight of her threats sinking in. What if Emily is right? What if James doesn't believe her? What if she loses the only family she has left? The fear is overwhelming, and Emily knows it. She can see the doubt in Sophie's eyes. "That's what I thought." Emily says smugly, turning away and picking up her wine glass again. Now run along, Sophie. Be a good girl and keep your mouth shut, just like you always do. Sophie stands there for a moment, frozen in place, her mind racing. She had hoped confronting Emily would give her some sense of control, some relief, but it's only made things worse. Emily has turned the tables on her, making her feel smaller and more powerless than ever. With tears finally spilling down her cheeks, Sophie retreats to her room, her heart heavy with despair. The confrontation didn't go the way she had hoped, and now she's more afraid than ever. Emily's words echo in her mind, taunting her, making her question whether she'll ever be able to escape this nightmare. But deep down, despite the fear, Sophie knows one thing. She can't keep living like this. Something has to change. She just doesn't know how. Over the next few weeks, James starts to sense that something is wrong with Sophie. It begins with little things. Her quiet demeanor, the way she barely speaks at the dinner table, and the dark circles under her eyes that make her look older than her 15 years. James has always prided himself on being a good father, but recently, he feels a growing distance between them. He blames it on the typical teenage phase, school stress, maybe a falling out with friends, but he can't shake the feeling that something deeper is happening. One evening, after another tense and quiet dinner, James knocks on Sophie's bedroom door. "Can I come in, sweetheart?" he asks softly. Sophie, curled up on her bed with a book in her lap, glances up. She hesitates for a moment, but then nods. "Sure, Dad." James steps inside, looking around the room that used to be filled with laughter, music, and the chaos of a teenager's life. Now, it feels eerily still. He sits on the edge of the bed, watching Sophie closely. "You've been really quiet lately," he begins. "Is everything okay?" Sophie looks down, picking at the edges of her book. "Yeah," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine. Just a lot of homework." James frowns. "I don't know, sophomore. You haven't been yourself. I know school can be stressful, but this seems like more than that." Sophie swallows hard, her heart racing. This is her chance. She could tell him everything right now. The way Emily treats her, the cruel words, the constant exclusion. She could finally let him know the truth. But then Emily's voice echoes in her head. "Do you really think he'll believe you? I'm the one he trusts." The fear grips her again, and she can't bring herself to say the words. What if Emily's right? What if her father doesn't believe her? What if it only makes things worse? The thought is too terrifying to bear. "I'm just tired, Dad," Sophie says finally, forcing a small smile. "It's nothing. I'll be okay." James studies her face, searching for something beneath the surface. He doesn't want to push her, but his instincts tell him there's more to the story. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" he says gently. "Whatever it is, I'm here for you." Sophie nods, but the smile doesn't reach her eyes. "I know. Thanks, Dad." James leans forward, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you, kiddo. Just don't shut me out, okay?" "I won't," Sophie whispers, though the guilt tightens in her chest. As James leaves the room, he can't shake the feeling that something is deeply wrong. He notices how Sophie flinches when Emily speaks to her, or how she always seems to be walking on eggshells. The subtle tension between his daughter and his wife has been gnawing at him for a while, but he's dismissed it, convincing himself that it's just part of the adjustment process. Blending families is never easy, after all. But tonight, as James lies awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, he feels a pit growing in his stomach. He replays conversations in his mind. The forced smiles, the nervous glances Sophie gives him when Emily is around. The way Emily always brushes off any concerns he raises about Sophie. He remembers the time he asked Emily why Sophie didn't want to come on a family outing to the lake. Emily had smiled and said, "Oh, you know how teenagers are. She probably just wanted some space." "I'm sure it's nothing." At the time, James had accepted it. But now, those little moments seem to pile up, forming a bigger picture that he can't ignore. Maybe Emily isn't as perfect as he thought. Maybe, just maybe, something more sinister is going on between her and Sophie. James's heart aches at the thought. He's been so wrapped up in his new marriage, in his happiness with Emily, that he might have missed the signs that his daughter is suffering. He can't believe he's been so blind. Determined to find out the truth, James makes a silent promise to himself. He'll keep a closer eye on things. No more dismissing Sophie's quietness as teenage moodiness. He'll pay attention, really pay attention, and get to the bottom of what's going on in his house. Because if his daughter is in pain, he needs to know why, and he'll do whatever it takes to protect her. A few days after his conversation with Sophie, James finds himself more observant, paying closer attention to the subtle dynamics between his daughter and Emily. He watches as Sophie grows increasingly reserved in Emily's presence, often excusing herself to her room or staying silent during meals. Emily, as usual, plays her role perfectly, acting the doting wife, her smile never faltering. But James can't shake the growing unease in his gut. Something is wrong, and he feels it more intensely with every passing day. One Friday afternoon, James finishes work early, something he rarely does. He decides to surprise his family and heads home, eager to spend time with Sophie and Emily. As he pulls into the driveway, he notices that Sophie's bedroom light is on, and the house is unusually quiet for the time of day. Stepping inside, he hears voices, Emily's, sharp and cold, and Sophie's, quieter, pleading. Curious but cautious, James walks toward the source of the voices, moving silently down the hallway until he reaches the living room. What he hears makes him stop dead in his tracks. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" Emily's voice is full of venom, completely different from the gentle tone she uses around him. "But you'll never win. Your father will always choose me. You're just an inconvenience in his life, Sophie. He's better off without you." James's heart pounds in his chest as he peers around the corner, his body tense. He can see Emily standing over Sophie, her face twisted in anger. Sophie looks small and scared, her eyes wide with fear as she stares up at her stepmother. She doesn't say a word, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "I don't know why you even bother trying to make him love you," Emily continues, her voice dripping with cruelty. "He's already moved on from you and your mother. You're just a reminder of a life he's trying to forget." James feels a cold wave of shock wash over him. The realization of what has been happening hits him hard, like a punch to the gut. He had been so blind, so utterly fooled by Emily's facade. All the moments he'd brushed off as nothing, the quiet tension, Sophie's distant behavior, Emily's constant dismissals, come rushing back with painful clarity. His daughter had been suffering, and he hadn't seen it. He hadn't protected her. He steps into the room, his face pale with rage and disbelief. What the hell is going on here? Emily spins around, her face instantly transforming from anger to feigned shock. "James, I didn't hear you come in," she says quickly, her voice now sweet and innocent. "We were just talking. Sophie's been upset lately, and I was trying to help her understand." "Stop," James says, his voice cold and controlled, but his eyes are burning with fury. "I heard everything, Emily. Everything." Sophie looks up at her father, her eyes brimming with tears. She doesn't say anything, too stunned by the sudden shift in the room. Emily's face falters for a moment, but she quickly recovers, putting on her well-rehearsed mask of innocence. "James, you're misunderstanding," she says, taking a step toward him, her voice pleading. "I've been trying to help her. She's been so difficult, and I've been doing everything I can to make this family work. Enough." James's voice is louder now, and Sophie flinches at the sound. He takes a step forward, standing protectively in front of his daughter. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been treating her like this?" Emily's facade begins to crack under the weight of James's accusation. Her eyes flash with panic as she realizes she's lost control of the situation. "James, You've been manipulating me," James says, his voice shaking with anger. "I trusted you. I believed you were helping us, helping Sophie, and all this time you've been tearing her down behind my back." Emily's expression hardens as she realizes there's no way out. "You don't understand," she says, her voice cold and defensive. "She's been nothing but a problem since the day I came into this house. She's a spoiled little brat who resents me because I'm not her mother. I was just trying to set boundaries." "Don't," James cuts her off, his voice deadly quiet now. Don't you dare blame this on Sophie. You've been abusing her, and I won't stand for it. You need to leave. Now. Emily's eyes widen in disbelief. You can't be serious, she says, her voice rising in indignation. You're really going to throw me out because of her? James stares at her, his jaw clenched. Yes, he says firmly. I won't let you stay here and hurt my daughter any longer. Emily's face twists with rage. You'll regret this, James, she spits, grabbing her purse and storming toward the door. You'll regret choosing her over me. James doesn't respond. He watches as Emily leaves the house, slamming the door behind her, the sound echoing through the silent rooms. He stands there for a moment, his heart pounding, the weight of the situation settling in. Finally, he turns to Sophie, who is still sitting on the couch, her face tear-streaked and pale. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, he says, his voice breaking. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. Sophie looks up at him, her lip trembling. I didn't think you'd believe me, she whispers. James pulls her into his arms, holding her tightly. I'll always believe you, he says, his voice full of regret. I'm so sorry. They sit there for a long time, father and daughter, finally united after months of pain and misunderstanding. James knows it will take time to heal, but he's determined to make things right, to rebuild the trust between them and ensure Sophie never feels alone again. In the hours following Emily's dramatic departure, James sits quietly in the living room, his mind swirling with the painful realization of how much he had missed. Sophie is upstairs, finally resting after the emotional whirlwind of the day. James knows he needs to do more than just apologize. Emily's behavior went far beyond cruelty. What she had done to Sophie was emotional abuse, and it wasn't something he could just let go. Taking a deep breath, he reaches for his phone. As much as it hurts to confront the truth, he knows that Emily's actions have legal consequences. James feels a surge of guilt. How had he let things get this far without noticing? But now, he's determined to do the right thing. After a few moments of hesitation, he dials the number for the police. The voice on the other end is calm and professional. Police department, how can I assist you? James swallows hard, his voice steady but laced with the weight of what he's about to say. I need to report an incident of domestic abuse. My daughter has been emotionally abused by my ex-wife, I should say. I just need help with what to do next. The officer asks a series of questions. James answers each one carefully, providing details of Emily's manipulation, the verbal abuse, and the escalating situation that he had overheard earlier in the day. James's heart pounds with each word. He recounts the subtle and not-so-subtle ways Emily had degraded Sophie, turning their home into a place of fear. Given what you've described, we'll need to file a formal report and open an investigation, the officer explains. If your wife is still living at the residence, we'll need to issue a restraining order. James lets out a sigh of relief, despite the heavy atmosphere. She's already gone. I asked her to leave. Good. The officer says firmly. We'll still need to take statements from both you and your daughter to make sure we document everything properly. Based on your account, we'll also reach out to Child Protective Services to ensure your daughter gets the support she needs. You're doing the right thing. Hearing those words, James feels a small weight lift from his shoulders. It doesn't make the situation any less painful, but knowing that he's taking the first step to protect Sophie gives him a sense of purpose. Thank you, he says, his voice thick with emotion. I just want her to feel safe again. After hanging up, James goes upstairs to check on Sophie. He finds her sitting on her bed, her knees drawn to her chest, staring out the window. The dim light from her bedside lamp casts long shadows across the room, making her look even smaller and more fragile than she already feels. Sophie looks up when James enters, her eyes puffy from crying. Is she gone for good? She asks quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. James crosses the room and sits beside her. Yes, she's gone. I called the police. They're going to help us make sure she can't come back and hurt you again. Sophie's eyes widen in surprise. The police? James nods, his expression serious but gentle. What Emily did was wrong, Sophie. It wasn't just mean, it was abusive, and I should have seen it sooner. But now, We're going to make sure she's held accountable for what she's done. Sophie takes a shaky breath, as if trying to process everything. I didn't know you could call the police for something like this. You can, and you should, James says firmly. What she did to you wasn't right, and you deserve to feel safe in your own home. I'm so sorry, Sophie. I should have protected you better. For a moment, they sit in silence. Then, Sophie leans into her father's side, and James wraps his arm around her, holding her close. It's going to be okay, he whispers. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you like that again. I promise. As they sit together, James feels the weight of the past few months settle on his shoulders, but this time it feels different. The fear and confusion that had gripped their home is beginning to lift, replaced by a determination to move forward. He knows there's still a long road ahead, both for Sophie's healing and for him to make amends, but for the first time in a long time, James feels like he's taking back control of their lives. Later that evening, the police arrive at the house to take their statements. Sophie, still shaken but determined, recounts her experiences with Emily's cruelty. The officers are patient and understanding, and James is by her side the entire time, offering quiet support. When the officers leave, James feels a sense of closure, though he knows this is only the beginning. The investigation will take time, and there may be legal battles ahead, but at least now Sophie knows she isn't alone. And for James, that's all that matters. The house is quiet again after the police leave, and as Sophie goes to bed, James stands in the hallway, staring at the closed door of what used to be Emily's room. He takes a deep breath, realizing that their family has changed forever, but this time, for the better. In the days following Emily's departure, the atmosphere in the house shifts. The weight that had hung over every corner seems to lift, and the once stifling tension starts to dissipate. For the first time in months, Sophie can breathe more easily, though the scars from Emily's abuse linger. James is deeply aware that while Emily is physically gone, the emotional toll she left behind will take time to heal. James is determined to rebuild the trust between him and his daughter. He begins to spend more time with Sophie, taking her out for walks in the park or sharing quiet dinners where they talk about anything: school, her favorite books, or simply how she's feeling. James listens more now, paying close attention to the small things he once overlooked, making sure Sophie knows that her voice is heard. One evening, as they sit on the back porch overlooking their well-manicured yard, Sophie turns to her father with a look of quiet contemplation. I never thought things would get better, she admits softly, her voice tinged with vulnerability. I thought I'd just have to deal with it, live with how she treated me. James feels a pang of guilt, but he pushes it aside, knowing that what matters now is how they move forward. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it, Soph, he says, his tone earnest. But I promise you, I'm here now, and I'll always believe you. You'll never have to go through something like that alone again. Sophie nods, her eyes focused on the horizon, the sun setting in soft hues of pink and orange. I just didn't think you'd believe me, she says after a pause. Emily had you so convinced that she was perfect. I thought, I don't know, that maybe you'd take her side. James shakes his head, regret flooding his chest. I was blind, he admits. I wanted to believe that Emily was making things better for us, that she was helping me and you. I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. But that's never going to happen again. I promise. They sit in silence for a moment, letting the soft evening breeze wash over them. It's a peaceful silence, one that signals a new beginning rather than the stifling quiet that had filled their home when Emily was around. Over the next few weeks, James notices small but important changes in Sophie. She begins to smile more often, her laughter, a sound he hadn't realized he missed so much, returns in small bursts when they joke or watch movies together. She spends more time with her friends, and her passion for sketching resurfaces. James encourages her, buying her a new set of pencils and a sketchbook, gently coaxing her to express herself again. One afternoon, James walks by Sophie's room and finds her at her desk, drawing by the window, the golden light filtering through the curtains. He pauses in the doorway, watching her quietly, and a deep sense of gratitude fills him. For so long, he had feared that he had lost his daughter to the trauma Emily had inflicted, but now, he sees the spark of the girl he once knew slowly returning. Sophie looks up and catches him standing there, smiling softly. "Hey, Dad." James smiles back, his heart warming at the sight of her contentment. "Hey, sophomore. How's the sketch coming along?" She turns her drawing toward him. A delicate, detailed rendering of their backyard, the flowers and trees brought to life with her careful strokes. "It's not finished yet," she says, her voice light, "but it's getting there." James steps into the room, sitting beside her, admiring the drawing. "It's beautiful," he says, his voice full of pride. "Just like everything you create." Sophie blushes slightly, but she's smiling, and that's all James needs to see. He realizes that healing is a process, and while they aren't fully there yet, they are on the right path. The darkness Emily brought into their lives is slowly being replaced by moments of light, by laughter, and by the rebuilding of their relationship. As the weeks turn into months, James and Sophie continue to grow closer. They talk more openly now, and James makes a conscious effort to be present, both emotionally and physically. The court proceedings regarding Emily's abuse go smoothly, and while it's a painful reminder of what they endured, James and Sophie face it together, their bond stronger than ever. One afternoon, after a particularly cathartic conversation, James finds himself reflecting on how far they've come. He and Sophie had weathered a storm, one that nearly tore them apart, but they emerged from it stronger. The house, once filled with tension and fear, is now a place of warmth and safety again. Sophie, too, feels the difference. She no longer feels like she has to hide or walk on eggshells. The fear that Emily instilled in her has begun to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of peace. It isn't easy, healing never is, but Sophie is learning that it's okay to trust again, and that she doesn't have to carry the burden of what happened alone. As they sit together in the living room one evening, the house quiet but comfortable, Sophie leans against her father's shoulder. "Thank you, Dad," she says quietly, her voice full of emotion. "For everything." James wraps his arm around her and kisses the top of her head. "No, Soph," he says softly. "Thank you. You're the strongest person I know, and I'm so proud of you." The story of James and Sophie doesn't end with a grand, dramatic conclusion, but rather with the quiet, steady rebuilding of their lives. They know that what they went through will always be a part of their story, but it won't define them. Together, they've learned that love and trust are the foundations of any family, and with those two things, they can face anything that comes their way. In the end, it's not about forgetting the past. It's about moving forward, together, stronger than before. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and watch this next story. It's really emotional.